Today, clean drinking water is something we take for granted. But huge increases in water demand, continuing pollution, and a massively outdated infrastructure means that behind the scenes, the system we rely on for our clean water is desperately struggling to cope. "50 years ago, much of Ireland still relied on local wells and springs for their water supply. Long before this, even before the advent of modern science, we understood the importance of this essential resource to life. Our ancestors created holy wells and dreamed up fantastical gods and goddesses to protect our valuable water sources. But as Ireland became more developed and industrialised and intensively farmed, we began to see a deterioration in the quality of our water. By the 1980s, we were facing an environmental crisis when many of our rivers and lakes became heavily polluted, killing plant life, decimating fish stocks, and destroying many of our most valuable water sources. Today, it costs about €1.2 billion a year to supply our drinking water and to treat our wastewater. But despite this investment, we face some very serious threats to the system. 4 out of every 10 litres of our drinking water supply are lost through leaking pipes. While many of the treatment plants we rely on to clean our wastewater before it discharges back into our rivers and lakes are no longer fit for purpose. In terms of pollution, we've come a long way since the 1980s, but the runoff from farms, outdated septic tanks, and other diffuse sources create very dangerous threats to our water sources. While boil water notices and pathogen outbreaks are a regular feature of the news.
We are making good progress on what we call point sources, in other words, the factories and the wastewater treatment plants. But there's a huge amount of work to do in terms of diffuse pollution, working with farmers, working in catchments all around the country.
With all these challenges we face, how can we ensure a safe and dependable water supply for the future? At Milltown Lake, County Monaghan, environmental scientists from Dundalk Institute of Technology have been studying the different pressures affecting the quality of the drinking water source in one typical rural community and exploring how this source can be protected from pollution.
If you're going to spread slurry or spread fertiliser in one of those fields out there, if that field has a drainage system through it, well, that's like a direct conduit almost then into the streams when it rains. That flows down through the river. But if in the river there's vegetation, that vegetation can take up some of the phosphorus. It doesn't get down to the lake. So we need to see exactly what all these different processes are and understand them and study them so that we can understand how the management of these fields around here affects the quality of the water in the lake.
The results of the study on Milltown Lake have shown that farming has led to severe degradation of the surrounding rivers and lakes. As part of this pilot project, farmers were encouraged to fence off the tributaries to the lake.
Parts of that would have been bare before and would have been just bare soil where the cattle had access into the stream. So number one, it stops the cattle actually getting into the stream and being able to defecate in the stream. But the other thing is that the vegetation regenerates, so the grass gets to grow, and that acts like a little filter. So as there's runoff coming from the fields, whatever's in it gets caught in the grass along the edges.
Over the years, I've seen the terrible environmental damage that agricultural pollution can cause to our rivers and lakes, and it can take decades to reverse. As farming becomes an increasingly important part of our economy once again, I find it refreshing to discover that simple measures can often play a big part in keeping our water clean.
Getting people to actually understand that the catchment and the influence of the catchment is so important to their actual drinking water quality. That's a big step, and I think if we can get that right, then we're on to a winner.
Near Anstown in Waterford, a group of forward-thinking farmers and environmentalists have been tackling some of these problems head-on.
Hello, Duncan.
Hi, Rory. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you here.
Yeah.
On a beautiful day.
Yes.
Wonderful.
A bit chilly, but it's
Absolutely.
lovely. Yeah.
And this is where the constructed wetlands are. You've got a town up here, the old village of Dunhill, and you've all these new houses up here.
Right.
So how does this actually work? What's the simple kind of method?
Well, the sewage that each person here produces, each household here produces, is collected and brought to the wetland. It's as simple as that. And the wetland intercepts the polluted water and supports a microcosm of bacteria which cleans the water. In fact, you're feeding the bacteria with the leftovers from human activity. And of course, the bacteria give rise to other microorganisms, to protozoans, which then gives rise to a whole range of insect life and other invertebrates, which then gives rise to support structure for fish, for birds, and so forth. So what you've got here is really humans connecting with nature, whereas before they did in a non-managed way, straight out into a drain and quickly down. And of course, if you don't have this retention time, if you don't have the time and space needed to deliver that time, you don't have clean water.
The wastewater from Dunhill village enters a series of ponds where it is progressively filtered before going back into the Anstown stream. Because the system is so effective, the water that discharges back into the river is actually cleaner than the water in the river itself.
Rory, is it the constructed wetland now associated with the housing here and the village that has caused all this improvement to the river?
No, not at all. It's about engagement of the whole community. Mainly the landowners with their farmyards having their wetlands intercept their contribution to the pollution.
Eugene Dunphy is one of about 15 farmers involved in the project.
So what sort of farming are you doing here?
Suckler to bee farming,
Okay.
and 100 cows.
What got you into all of this idea of constructed wetland?
I suppose it was to control the runoff from the farmyard, and I had some marginal land, and the constructed wetlands and the forestry fitted together nicely. It gives great peace of mind to see that you're controlling the pollution and that the river is being kept clean. A lot of farmers, with the best will in the world, they can never contain all the dirty water from the farmyards, and the wetland system is a good way of doing it. And with no labour involved, it just happens. The water is caught in the wetlands and cleaned.
As a result of this project, the Anstown stream has been radically transformed. What was once referred to as a dirty drain is now a crystal clear river once again. Even the salmon have come back to spawn, a sure sign of a healthy river.
This is about a synthesis or synthesizing from disparate sources of biology, a new paradigm in land and water management.
I've been really inspired by Rory's vision at Dunhill and how through the joined-up thinking of environmental scientists, farmers and local community, a solution has been found to some major water pollution problems. On a national level, the problem of dealing with our wastewater is a serious challenge for our local authorities. About 60% of our annual budget for water goes on the treatment of our wastewater. But many of the mechanised plants that currently treat wastewater for towns are overloaded and require significant further investment. In Mountmellick, I've come to meet engineers with Laois County Council, Michael O'Hora and Wes Wilkinson.
What we have here is the concrete, the steel, the electric motors, the electric pumps. All the structures here are sort of energy intensive to put in and energy intensive to maintain. And it's very much a process orientated, so you're talking about electric controls, telemetry, monitoring different parts of the process to make sure it's working right. What you see here is really a snapshot of what happens in a lot of other towns in similar situations. You start off with a plant that was built in maybe the 70s or the 80s, and then with increases in population, or a tightening of standards, you have to make your system match the incoming loading and then try and treat it more efficiently to match your discharge limits on your plant.
We've a legacy of, unfortunately, inadequate funding, and that just has happened, and we've had to deal with that as best we could.
In nearby Clonaslee, Laois County Council have installed an integrated constructed wetland to replace an outdated mechanical treatment plant built in the 1970s for a population of 600 people.
Hello, hi. Who have we got?
Porrick Joyce.
Hi, Porrick.
Nice to
Hello.
meet you. Hello, Duncan. Isla Carty,
Isla.
Environment.
So, Isla, you're the designer now of this constructed wetland here. Where do we start?
Well, this wetland cell here is the first cell of a 5-pond system. It covers about a third of the overall treatment area, and then it's followed by another 4 wetland ponds.
What sort of plants have you got?
Well, there are a number of various different types of plants. They're emergent vegetation. They grow in the water, and they're all native species. There are cattails, rushes, irises. This is the Clodia River, which is the receiving water course. The final discharge flows into this river further downstream from the actual site here.
So, having gone through this whole system here, natural system, what's the quality of the water when it re-enters the river?
There is a discharge licence on the system here, an Environmental Protection Agency discharge licence, and they have set limits on the quality of the discharge for the site. And in fact, we're meeting the quality, the limits here even after Pond 2, which is about 50% of the ICW area.
Really? So you're at the right quality here, and after this it's improving beyond that?
Further improved.
Before it gets into the river. So if you compare now the new mechanical treatment plant with the integrated constructed wetland, what's the difference in cost?
The cost would be that it's up to 70% cheaper to run an ICW versus a traditional treatment plant, which is an unbelievable amount of money to be saved in an ICW.
That's in the running costs?
The running costs.
All the way now for the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years?
Exactly. A traditional plant will get poorer over time. It won't perform as efficiently, whereas an ICW will gain efficiency over time because the plants will mature and they will get stronger and they will suck up more nutrients and greater clarity in the water as time goes on, whereas a typical plant will require further investment to keep that level of treatment up.
Now, if you take this plant and compare it with Clonaslee, where you put in a constructed wetland, which is giving you better quality water discharge?
The wetlands at Clonaslee will be working to a tighter regime than we are actually currently working to here. And the process as to how it achieves that is vastly different than what we have, as you can appreciate.
While it's exciting that projects like the integrated constructed wetlands are being looked at by county councils in Ireland, it's only a solution to part of a much wider issue of underinvestment in our water infrastructure. It's currently estimated that a staggering 41% of our public drinking water supply is lost in leaky pipes. In Dublin Port, various things are being done to deal with the enormous amount of water the Dublin Port Company were losing every year.
Basically what we do is full visual assessment of the inside of the pipeline. We do leak detection then as there's a leakage head built onto the camera just to do a fact finding of exactly what's happening inside that pipeline.
By visually assessing the pipes, solutions can be found for removing the heavy build-up and relining and reinforcing the old pipes.
We can replace the inside of it with a bladder, and you're left with a pipe then inside the pipe.
So it's a whole structural lining inside.
Brand new structural pipe with inside the pipe.
Right, so it doesn't matter what the condition of the outside pipe is now, you've got your structural pipe built new inside it.
Exactly.
This can provide a more cost-effective alternative to digging up our streets and roads. With our economy in tatters, I'm keen to find out how we're facing these issues at a national level. The EPA were set up 20 years ago and are responsible for monitoring, licensing and enforcing the increasingly strict controls surrounding water quality in Ireland.
What are the big issues now with water? How is water managed in Ireland today?
Up till now, water has been complicated, Duncan. The Department of Environment is in charge of water services in the whole country, and it used to be that we had 34 local authorities, each responsible for their own county or city, and then the third part of the triangle was the EPA, where we work, which was supervising the local authorities on their water functions, let's say. But now, this year, 2013, there's going to be a big change. Irish Water has been set up by the state, and so the work of all these 34 local authorities is being brought together. There will be service contracts with one central player called Irish Water, which will be in charge of both the providing drinking water for people and wastewater. So one body nationally responsible for water services, and it has to be funded partly by the people and partly by the state. But the EPA will continue to be the environmental regulator for Irish Water.
In some places, up to 18 different councils were managing the catchment of one river. With little coordination between some of these councils, it's clear that something had to be done. I've come to meet Pádraig Fogarty from Irish Water.
Water is a precious resource, and we must cherish and protect that resource.
Pádraig, what's the benefit of having a single water utility in Ireland?
Well, Bord Gáis has an established capability as a single utility operating on a national basis. And that capability will be combined with the experience and knowledge of the local authority personnel on the 2,000 odd water and wastewater treatment plants that exist in the country. The cost in delivering all of these complex services is expensive. There is an ageing infrastructure, and we need to invest in that infrastructure. But we must acknowledge as well that, some of our pipe networks are over 100 years old. So it is important that there is funding for water services into the future to make sure that we have the investment in the infrastructure. What we want to make sure with the establishment of Irish Water is that we will be able to deliver a world-class service to businesses and domestic customers into the future.
Irish householders use, on average, 150 litres of water per person per day. This is double the amount of water used by many of our European neighbours. It's no coincidence that we're also the only country in the developed world where domestic users don't pay directly for their water. One of the first jobs Irish Water have to face is the installation of water meters and the introduction of domestic water charges.
So when householders are charged for water, will that money go back into water services, or will it just form another tax?
Well, Duncan, it is important to note that as part of the reform of Irish Water, that money raised from customers will go back into water services. Firstly, it will pay for the operational costs of providing this complex service, and it will also help to provide the investment in the infrastructure that we need.
In many parts of the country, people have been paying for their water for years. To Davenant Group Water Scheme in County Monaghan was the first group water scheme in the country to introduce water metering and charging. And I've come to meet Brian MacDonald from the National Federation of Group Water Schemes to find out more about their experience.
So there's the meter on now. You can see the meter beginning to turn.
Yeah.
So the value so immediately we can tell from this here if the household is using water, if there is a leak, and you can tell the volume of water that has been used in the house since the last time that the meter was read. So the group water scheme is able to keep an accurate tally on each household. If the scheme notices a large increase of water along this district metered area, there'll be a bulk meter, a district meter controlling this road.
Okay.
So they know if there's a sharp increase in water demand along this road. So that indicates one of two things. It indicates either a leak in the pipe network itself or in an individual household.
There was a huge amount of leaks going on. before the meters went in.
Absolutely. Certainly, it's not an exaggeration to say that group water schemes across the board would have saved in the region of 50% of their daily water demand once the meters went in and once they began to be used effectively.
That's incredible. Is that averaging out now all over the country with group water schemes around the country?
Absolutely. And where you combined the meter with a realistic pricing structure, those results were even more telling. A lot of people, when the meters started going in, didn't even know they were losing water. So that was the difficulty. It wasn't that people were being flahoolach with water. It wasn't people that people didn't care. They didn't actually know, because sometimes maybe a drive went in, a new Tarmacadam drive, or a digger knocked the pipe, and the pipe could have been leaking for years.
And what do householders here think of water charging?
With the group water scheme here now, how has that worked out over the
Never had a problem.
30 years that it's in
Never
here?
had a problem, ever. Never had a problem.
Right.
We found it very...
Good water pressure?
Great water pressure, lovely water. Because of the way I was reared, and because we always conserved water, and because water was a commodity that you had to work for and walk for and carry, I suppose it was always in my psyche that you don't waste water.
And do you think it's right that people have to pay for their water?
Why not? I mean, it's something that you know we need and we use, and we, like everything else, we have to buy our food. If we don't grow it ourselves, we have to pay for our electricity. And no, I don't see any reason that we shouldn't pay for our water.
And is the meter a good idea?
It is, because you're only paying for what you use.
In the case of Davenant, the local community accepted the water charges to ensure a safe and dependable water supply, because they trusted that the money they spent on water would be reinvested where it was needed. Part of this income was spent on measures to protect the source, and we've come to Loch and Troher in the Slieve Bay Hills, which is the main source for Davenant.
There'd been turf cutting here up until 6 or 7 years ago.
Right, okay.
Quite intensive turf cutting, and then we convinced the people that were involved to move away because it was having an effect on the lake water.
Right, it was damaging the lake water, was it?
It was raising the colour of the lake water. We found it more difficult to treat it because the peat from the turf cutting was arriving down at our intake point and ending up at the treatment plant. So the people that were treating the water were saying to us, it's causing huge difficulties.
How much money was it costing you?
In the region of about 40,000 a year extra over and above the normal cost for treating the water, because the colour had deteriorated due to the turf cutting, so we had to do something about that.
Can I have a look at it?
We're a group scheme of 1,000 houses, so we need to treat the water. This is our source, there's no other source. So we simply had to treat this in order to make it suitable for drinking water at the households.
If you can avoid the man-made inputs into those problems, then you're reducing your overall problem, you're reducing your treatment needs. Far less treatment required, far less cost to the communities, and a much healthier water supply for the people, and of course a pristine environment protected.
Dairy farm, full-time dairy farm.
It's clear from talking to the people in Davenant, there are some very compelling arguments for the introduction of water meters and for water charging. By reducing our wastage and usage of water, we can take strain off an already overloaded system, thereby reducing the cost of both supplying our drinking water and treating our wastewater. By having a single body managing our water services, the money earned from charges can be efficiently reinvested into the new infrastructure. But if we want to avoid further outbreaks of Cryptosporidium and E. coli in our water systems, we have to comply with the most basic provisions of the Water Framework Directive. This involves investing into protecting our sources and river catchments.
It's all a network. The fields linked to the streams linked to the rivers linked to the lake, the chemistry is linked to the biology is linked to everything else that's happening, and all that affects the water quality. So we need to understand how all these different parts of the jigsaw link together.
And back at home, let's take the politics out of the argument and focus on what's really important: the need to guarantee a safe, reliable and affordable supply of water to all our citizens. In the end, maybe it comes down to common sense. If we take care of our water will take care of us.